Okay, I think we have a few more people that have joined us. Good to see everyone. And thanks for joining us today. Yeah, we'll just kick off. So, welcome to all of our users, our ecosystem partners, and friends of Data Drive. Really good to see some familiar names and some new names as well. I am Spongile. I'm Deputy Director at Data Drive, and I'm joined by some colleagues, Liz, Jess, and a new colleague, Sarah, who is supporting this webinar. And the Data Drive colleagues will also help with fielding some questions later. I'm expecting Rumbi to also join us, who you are all familiar with. Okay. I'm really excited to be in conversation with everyone today as we bring this first year of the ELOM in Practice webinar series to a close. This is our fifth webinar this year. So thank you for joining us today, especially given the time of year, all the work wrap up that we are all busy with, and the smell and taste of December in the air. So the intention for this webinar series was really to convene our community of nonprofits and resource and training organizations that we call RTOs that are growing with us in this ELOM work. And reflecting on their experiences using the ELOM suite of tools, and then sharing back in all manner of ways from their fieldwork and their study outcomes. And the idea is to inspire others to consider how the ELOM tools can help them use data to drive change in their organizations, as well as for the many early learning programs or ELPs that the RTOs service in various ways. And in this particular webinar, we're really examining what ELOM can or can't tell you about your program. So the theme for our webinar today is users commissioning large-scale evaluations using the ELOM tools. And so we will learn from two user organizations today that have administered ELOM studies as part of their large-scale evaluations. And so to help us unpack their lessons from the field, we are joined by speakers from the Unlimited Child and SmartStart Early Learning. And both of them will be sharing their lessons from their most recent large-scale evaluations, where they've used the ELOM tools to attempt to essentially evaluate their program effectiveness. And so by the end of the conversation, we hope that you all will come away with not only a better understanding of the programs that they run, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with because these are two very big names in the sector, but most of all, with some understanding of how to come to a main study question, how to work your way to answering that question as part of an evaluation. And this is particularly exciting because many organizations are often conducting formative assessments. And so those are assessments that monitor learning as it progresses, right? Where feedback is used for ongoing improvement. But in these two case studies with SmartStart and the Unlimited Child, they have undertaken summative assessments, which evaluate learning at the end of a period to measure achievement or effectiveness of their programs overall and identify some areas that require probably some rethinking and revision. And each of their presentations will take about 10 minutes. And thereafter, we will open to the floor for questions in the second half of our time together. And so just to guide us through this webinar, some housekeeping up front. Firstly, just a note that this webinar is being recorded. A lot of you will know that we usually post these on the Data Drive YouTube channel. So if you'd like to catch up on any of the webinars that you've missed, please do go to YouTube for the Data Drive channel. And I know that, we often ask people to get off camera for these webinars just to reduce the disruption. But When you are a speaker on a webinar like this, it's really great to see some faces. So if you feel that you have strong enough bandwidth, please feel free to turn on your camera so that Justine and Rosisha feel like they are in a room. But what we will ask for is that you keep your microphones off, just so that we're not hearing any background noises. Okay, so that's the first. The second is, as always, we ask that you help us keep improving these webinars. And given that this is the first year that we've run them, and we're going to go into the new year with some new, fresh themes and topics, we'd appreciate responses to a feedback form that we usually load onto your screens at the end of the webinar. So once we've ended the webinar, if you can just wait a minute or so for the feedback form to load. But I will remind you before we end. And then lastly, please try to engage in real time. You know, often when we are in these webinars, we have questions, comments that arise in real time. And so you can do that by posting your questions in the chat. And then we'll pause briefly at the end of each of the presentations to see if there are clarifying questions, any relevant comments at that point. But many of those questions will be left to the end. And so if you can just note that if necessary, and probably in many of the cases, I may ask you to unmute yourself, come on video, and ask your question directly when the time comes. Okay. So now that that's all out of the way, I'd like to now introduce you briefly to our first speaker, and that is Rosisha Ishwadat, who is the Chief Operating Officer at the Unlimited Child. And TUC trains and coaches childminders to become ECD practitioners and really helps them transform their spaces into learning through play environments, so they can ensure that children have a proper foundation for school and life. So, Rosisha, if you are ready, you can take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Sibongile, and I'm just going to share my presentation.
For those that are joining us while Rosisha brings up her presentation, welcome, and feel free if you have good bandwidth to be on video, but if you can keep your microphones off, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
A moment.
Okay.
And of course, technology will get us down when we least expect it.
Take your time, Rosisha. It's okay. Really great to see so many people on the call today.
Mhm.
Oh, hi, Melissa.
It's not showing. It's not picking up.
If you were struggling, Rosisha, I wonder if Liz could
Share.
share the presentation instead. Liz, if you're able to, or Jess.
I will share that now. Let me try.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Otherwise, can I suggest, Justine, we've just checked your presentation. Could you potentially jump in?
I'm happy to. If you're not, are you struggling still? Let me know. Should I do that?
I am, unfortunately. So yes.
No problem.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so instead, I will just introduce Justine Joel, who is the lead for program design and development at SmartStart Early Learning. SmartStart is focused on closing the early learning access gap at scale using an end-to-end delivery platform that sets up and supports home and community-based early learning programs through a national network of partners. And I'm sure that all of us here today are familiar with SmartStart. So if you are ready, Justine, please, you can go ahead.
Sure. Mine seems to be sharing, but I just want to check, are you seeing the big screen or are you seeing the lots of little screens?
We are seeing your presenter view, but I
Okay,
think you can
that's
switch
better. Is that
that.
better?
That's just gone away for
Oh,
me.
strange. Okay, I
Let me
will
try
fix
to
it
share
out.
it again. Okay.
No problem. Let me fix it quickly. Okay, share. Tech, it's always a problem, right? Even if you've tested it 100
Yes.
times. So.
Even though we've been on Zoom for 5 years.
Okay, there we go. Are you
There
all
we
seeing
go.
that?
Yeah,
Okay.
great. Thanks, Justine.
So maybe just to say thanks, Ibongile, for the introduction, and very nice to see lots of names I know in the chat. Just to apologize, I'm not going to do what you said, which is to share much about SmartStart, because I was instructed we are only allowed 10 slides and only allowed 10 minutes. So let me start my timer now. So I'm not going deeply into SmartStart or deeply into our evaluation. I will share some of it. But what I'm more trying to do is bring in some of the questions that were tasked to us as part of this team around what were we learning around using ELOM and in a large scale evaluation. So I might speak very fast, so hopefully not too fast. But just to confirm, so SmartStart is a South African network of partners and practitioners working to increase access to early learning. That's really what's important to us is the million children who are currently not accessing the 3 to 5 year old gap. And we're trying to assess, sort of harness the power and potential of home and community-based early learning programs. We're a single national delivery platform, and yet we work with a national network of 13 NGOs. We also have 4 branches. We license and support currently over 14,000 early learning practitioners who run sort of micro social enterprises, and they are all licensed through a network of the partners and what we call coaches, our field officers, to provide a quality early learning program that's currently in delivery to over 160,000 children in home and community-based settings. So sorry, next slide. Our question when we were embarking on this, we'd done an evaluation in 2018 with an external provider that had showed that our program was making significant gains for children, but we'd grown substantially since 2018. And so our question was, does SmartStart work at scale? And the answer to this question for us was really important because we thought not only does it have implications for our program, we'd sort of said our program was effective in 2018, we showed that. But what we were trying to show was what kind of learnings could we take with us to think about going to scale in South Africa in general, beyond SmartStart? How do we think about what the best solutions could be for closing the early learning access gap so that together we can all reach those 1 million children? So that's what we were trying to understand in our evaluation. So we're interested in the extent to which home and community-based programs, the SmartStart model, could shift outcomes for children, and what some of the key contributors, whether some of the key contributors to the change could be identified. We wanted to help answer the question, does SmartStart work at scale? Because the answers would have implications to programs and program design across South Africa. And then children's access to the right development and learning opportunities before they start school has the potential to transform their outcomes. And we really needed to understand how we were achieving according to that so that we could try to reach these 1 million children who are currently not accessing. We were asked which tool we used, where and when. So most of you, I think, know the ELOM suite of tools. We used the early learning outcomes measure as the main one. We also did a caregiver interview, and a practitioner interview. The practitioner interview was to gather further insights around the qualification levels, the physical setting, the teacher-child ratios, group sizes, the availability of learning materials, and the considerations for health and nutrition. It happened across 325 SmartStart sites in 6 provinces, so really representing urban, rural, informal, slightly more formal. And who took part was 551 children, aged between 50 and 69 months. And it took place in 2025. Just importantly, the children were assessed at the start and again at the end. So there was a baseline and an end line to show so that we could measure the progress over time, not just look at how they were doing at the end of the program. Importantly, we started with a lot more sites, and that's going to be something that was our big learning, was about attrition. When you're trying to do a baseline and an end line, how much extra you have to take in order to make sure you end up with a sample at the end that's still useful to you in making any statements about your program's success. Importantly, it was an independent team. So it wasn't the SmartStart team, even though we have our own ELOM assessors as well. We made a representative sample of our programs. So SmartStart has a way of grouping our programs. We use a traffic light system of red, orange, and green. We did not just pick the green ones, which we'd done in our first 2018 sample. We looked at the red, orange, and green. We did the before and after design, which I mentioned earlier. Not a full year, and this is also the challenge of large-scale evaluations in ECD. We know it takes a long time to recruit children, and then you still have to get the children settled before you start doing your ELOM baseline, and then before the end of the year, when everyone disappears in December, you've got to make sure you've got time to do an end line. So we only had an 8-month period of program exposure. We did compare it to the national benchmark, and this is the real power of the ELOM tool, is that you're able to look at the Thrive by 5 index as a bit of a comparator. And importantly, we controlled for other factors: age, resources, location, and practitioner qualifications. And I'll talk a little bit more about that if I have time near the end. I'm aware my time is ticking. So just everybody knows that ELOM enables you to see whether your children in your program are developing on track for their age and how this changes over time. And just to say, this is the only piece we're going to use to discuss our program. I can go into more details later. But obviously we looked at all the domains, which we saw success across the whole domain. What we saw was this improvement. 45% were on track in the beginning and 65 were on track at the end, which we were really proud about. So a significant change there, as well as a significant reduction in those that were falling far behind to those that then were only 14% at the end. So we were very, very happy with the change over time. And just to say, the other significant difference we saw was because we looked at quintiles, so where the children were placed socio-economically, we saw a radical improvement in those in quintiles 1, those who were not on track, and then those that were on track at the end. So we were seeing we're really making the most significant impact for poorer children, which is something we're really interested in and focused on. But that was one of the pieces of the gains we looked at. But that's the last I'm talking about findings. So just to say, ELOM can really provide a snapshot, but it's not a full story. You need to know why or how those outcomes occurred, which is why we looked at a number of different factors in the program: our coaching, the dosage, the qualifications of the staff, the parents, the home learning environment. Without this rich implementation or process data, it's hard to contextualize the results to specific practices or contextual factors. And it's not a standalone quality tool. It doesn't automatically mean a program is good or bad. You have to understand the context too. So for example, in our 2018 study, we had one group that looked quite bad according to the results. But when we cross-referenced that with the stunting rates in that area and the poverty of that area, we saw that that area was much worse, had much poorer health and social environments context. And so it's really important to understand that when you're thinking about your evaluations. So what we learned about large-scale evaluations is that you do need to control for various factors. It's important to ensure your study is built to control for all of these things so that you're properly checking the program's effect. Data access was a really interesting learning for us. Our consent forms allowed the data to be shared with the external company that was doing that. When we wanted to do later, deeper analysis, that company had closed down and we couldn't reanalyze the data because we didn't have the permissions. So I know it sounds like a small thing, but when you're thinking about large scale evaluation, don't forget the T's and C's. What was also really important for us is to think, design for the future use of all that data you're collecting. It's expensive to collect the data. So decide early if this is a once-off evaluation or part of a learning system and you want to learn over time so that you make sure you've collected all the data you need at that moment. So for us, for example, data around coaching visits or the coaches' qualifications or how many of them had run home interventions, work with the parents. Those were really important things we were interested in over time. Granularity matters. So those that are on track or not on track hides important variations, just the big group. You're sometimes interested in breaking that into the sub-bands, and that was quite informative. And then another big one was for us, how do we share our learnings internally to enable program reflections and learnings? You don't want to jump to assumptions around what's happening, but you do want to do that. So my last slide, oh, my time is gone, 10 minutes. So just to say is really think ahead about consent, access, and reanalysis. So you plan all of that up front. So you don't waste all the investment you made in the data analysis. Make your fieldwork documentation watertight so you're not later caught with issues around that. Invest in some sort of data partnership so you're not just having the data as a product, and design your evaluation with your tomorrow's questions in mind. And just to say, they asked us for a wildcard slide, and mine was really, don't underestimate the fine print in your consent form. We thought we had everything tied up, but really created a whole lot of problems for us later around our ability to reanalyze the data and use it. And that's it from me.
Well, thank you so much, Justine. That was a bit of a sprint, but thank you for
Sorry.
trying to keep to the time. I hope everyone here got to make some notes and have noted their questions, any comments, which you can place in the chat and we'll revisit. There's some really interesting things that emerged from that presentation, Justine, which I'm sure are going to raise some questions about the study design, and a whole lot of other things that you mentioned. So thank you very much. Okay, great. And I see that, Rasisha, you are ready with your presentation. So once again, our second presenter is Rasisha Ishwadat, who is the Chief Operating Officer at the Unlimited Child. And the Unlimited Child trains and coaches childminders to become ECD practitioners and to help them transform their spaces into learning through play environments. Go ahead, Rasisha. If you can maybe put a enlarge your presentation, sorry, because we're just seeing all of the slides. Are you able to do that?
I'm the one presenting on Rasisha's behalf, so just
Ah,
want to check.
okay. Go ahead, Jess. Thank you so much.
Is
Thank you.
that full screen now?
Yes, perfect. So yeah, thank you. And apologies for the glitch. But good morning, colleagues. And it is such a pleasure to be part of the webinar this morning to discuss ELOM and really how it connects to the broader mission of strengthening ECD systems in South Africa. And at the Unlimited Child, we've learned that improving quality at scale requires more than a single intervention. It really calls for a very integrated, holistic model. And the four pillars of our quality improvement model really creates an enabling environment where we have seen the ELOM data meaningfully drive improvement in practice. And so I'm not going to go through our four pillars. I think it's quite explicit on the slide. And I think, many of you know the Unlimited Child. But what I do want to emphasize is that together, these four components form really a comprehensive ecosystem of support. And when paired with ELOM, we're not only able to identify gaps insights, but really act on them, monitor progress, and demonstrate true impact at scale. Next slide, please. So as we reflect on ELOM data through the years, and we have conducted quite a few pre and post ELOM assessments at scale, as well as dipstick assessments. But it is helpful to return to where it all started. And the graph that you see really captures a very pivotal moment for us. And this was the independent ELPO national comparison study that was done in 2018. And this study evaluated several early learning programs across South Africa. And what you're seeing is really a simple but powerful story. And across all of the programs assessed, the Unlimited Child demonstrated the highest overall developmental gains. So what ELOM really, and the ELPO study in particular, really confirmed for us is that our quality improvement system paired with strong implementation produces measurable developmental outcomes. And that is actually what makes ELOM so powerful. It's not just about whether improvement is happening, but it helps us understand where, for whom, and why, so that we can actually act with intention, we can refine our models, and we can scale what actually works. And so as we move forward, we recognized that studies like ELPO really remind us that evidence matters. ELOM provides the measurement, and our model provides the mechanism. And together, this has created a pathway for early learning systems that are equitable, accountable, and truly impactful. Next slide, please. So this graph really provides a broader perspective on subsequent ELOM 4 and 5 assessments that we conducted. The first in 2022 with a cohort of 732 children, and the second, our most recent and robust assessment in KZN last year, assessing more than 1,200 children. And what you're seeing is despite differences in provinces, in sample size and context, the trends that emerge are consistent and encouraging. So what did the ELOM data actually tell us? Well, we know ELOM data demonstrates clearly measurable gains in child development. And these consistent results really reinforced our quality improvement model. The comparative analysis also allowed us to understand which domains are responding most strongly to program inputs. So for example, we consistently saw pronounced gains similar to what the ELPO study highlighted. And these gains really reflected strengths in our program practice, which was strong resource alignment, effective pedagogical routines, and mentoring that supports intentional teaching. But the data also gave us insight into contextual differences across provinces, because not all domains progress the same rate. Not all centers experience the same shifts. And so seeing these variations in the data was incredibly valuable because it helped us identify where targeted investment was needed and whether that was additional coaching or adaptations to context-specific challenges. And then finally, this kind of evidence really informs organizational decision-making at scale. It guided us where to strengthen our model, where to deepen our support, and where to innovate. Next slide, please. So as we've deepened our use of ELOM, the most valuable aspect of the data is how it guides program adaptation and improvement. And this is kind of a snapshot of how we've taken very specific insights from ELOM and translated them into very concrete program adaptations. And as an example, I'm going to refer to the third one, where literacy scores that was already high at baseline, and this created the risk of plateau. So in order to address this, we shifted our training focus towards dialogic interaction and deepening children's vocabulary, which ensured a continued growth rather than stagnation. And so in essence, This demonstrates how measurement actually drives action. ELOM for us doesn't just sit on a shelf. It directly informs how we refine our model, how we better serve practitioners, and ultimately how we serve children. Next slide, please. So it's important to remember that data is only as valuable as what you do with it. And so for us, ELOM has become much more than a simple measurement tool. It actually has become a catalyst for system-wide improvement. So first, ELOM really helps us to strengthen our insight into learning and practice. And by looking at specific domain-level strengths and gaps, we had a far clearer understanding of what children were actually experiencing in classrooms. And this allowed us to adjust practice based on evidence. Second, the data guided us in terms of our curriculum review, our curriculum refinement, and our CPD design, which is our continuous professional development workshops. And we use the ELOM insights to interrogate this alignment between our curriculum and developmental outcomes, which really resulted in very intentional sequence planning, enhanced lesson routines, and CPD modules that responded directly to domain-specific needs. Third, the data directly informed our coaching and professional development. And here we focused on for example, we focused on centers that had lower gains that received far more frequent visits. And coaches really used ELOM findings to guide their modeling activities and their demonstration lessons. And lastly, the process really strengthened our measurement and adaptive systems. So we improved our monitoring processes, we integrated data review into routine decision making, and we built internal capacity to be able to act on developmental data. So this has made us as an organization much more agile, able to test, refine, and scale innovations that is really based on what the data is telling us. Next slide, please. And so in this slide, I've attempted to pull together how it all has come together. Everything that we've learned through years of implementation, years of measurement, years of adaptation. These are some of the core lessons that actually have shaped how we operate as an organization at scale, supporting almost 7,000 ECD centers in our network, reaching over 14,000 ECD practitioners and across 5 countries. And each year, cumulatively, we've reached over 2.5 million children. And so the first major lesson was really around workplace professionalization, because we know that evidence shows that practitioners are the key drivers of developmental outcomes. So apart from training, we really focused on ongoing pedagogical support, continuous feedback, and environments that value emotional and relational practice, which are essential. The second lesson was the importance of data-driven, evidence-based programming. And ELOM really pushed us to stop focusing on activities and outputs, but instead concentrate on mechanism. What actually causes learning to happen? So we now operate in a much more integrated evidence ecosystem where we combine developmental assessments with quality measures and practitioner performance insights. And this has strengthened the way in which we diagnose our program, the way we adjust, and the way we innovate. Our third lesson is really about maintaining high consistency in ELOM scores over time. And achieving strong results once isn't the challenge, but sustaining that year after year at scale is the real test of program quality. And what we've learned is that consistency actually requires discipline systems such as reliable coaching dosage, fidelity checks, peer learning structures, and standardized play-based resources. And all of this is coupled with digital monitoring, feedback loops, and year-on-year adaptations that keep programming fresh and responsive. And I want to emphasize that consistency is not accidental. It is actually engineered through routine, structure, and continuous support. And the last lesson is really around equity and scale. And what we've learned is that high quality early learning cannot remain dependent on isolated projects, on individual centers, or on short-term donor cycles. For us to truly achieve impact at population level, we have to start designing for scale. And some of these intentional strategies should be aligned with government policies like your Banapele roadmap, as well as having somewhat diversified pathways in terms of direct and indirect replication. But in terms of doing so, maintaining quality and standardization. And ELOM has also helped us strengthen donor and partner confidence by providing credible, comparable data that informs investment planning and policy alignment. Next slide, please. So I now want to highlight a critical dimension of our work, and we had an amazing opportunity to validate the Lego Engage tool, which examined 4 key dimensions of adult-child interactions that are detailed on the slide. And this was an international research study conducted across 5 countries and over 3 continents. And such an amazing opportunity for us as an organization. Next, and my last slide. And so what we did was we linked each of these constructs to ELOM data, and this allowed us to connect teaching practice with developmental gains. And following the successful validation of this tool, it has now been finalized and will be launched next year as a global measure of quality play-based learning. And I want to end off by saying that whilst ELOM is an exceptionally valuable tool for understanding school readiness, it's important to recognize what ELOM does not tell us. So it does not tell us why children achieve high or low scores, or capture the learning environment, or the nuances of practitioner behavior, or even the richness of interactions within the classroom. But ELOM is powerful and essential. And we have recognized that it forms part of a more comprehensive measurement ecosystem. Its real value is when it's used together with observational tools, practitioner inputs, and continuous quality improvement systems to really build a full picture of children's early learning experiences. And colleagues, that is the real value of ELOM. And together, our learnings from ELOM have formed really a backbone for our approach going forward. They show us what truly matters for impact: capable practitioners, evidence-based design, and disciplined support systems. And these insights have become our guardrails. They are shaping the way we scale, the way we partner, and the way we position our model within the national ECD landscape. And our shift from program delivery to system design is now shaping the next chapter for the unlimited child. And it really positions us to contribute meaningfully to South Africa's national ECD reform agenda and the broader global conversation on early learning systems. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosisha. And I'm sure Justine is wishing she had taken 2 more minutes just to close it out properly. But thank you for that and for elevating your presentation a little bit and not just focusing on the ELOM study, but its implication also in the broader system. So thank you so much for that. Okay, so we've got a little over 20 minutes. It's always a rush through these webinars. An hour is just never enough. So let's see how much we can do with our 20 minutes. So again, just also for the benefit of those that joined us a bit late, is that I'm going to ask you to please come on video and turn on your mic if you are able to do that. If you want to ask a question, you are also welcome to put some questions in the chat. Liz, you'll let us know if you've picked up any questions so far, but I'm going to open it up now to the group for any questions. I've got many of my own, but I want to give you all an opportunity to ask Justine and Rosisha questions, please. You're also welcome to raise your hand, or if there's nobody else speaking, you can just come off mute and speak. Maybe while everyone is warming up, because I'm quite curious about this, especially seeing Natalie on my screen, Natalie Varian, and I know she looks very busy. But I'm really wondering, Justine, what informed your choice of an evaluator? Whether you went for an individual consultant, an evaluation company, just in terms of the broader evaluation, not just kind of the ELOM study, the cost of the exercise, familiarity with the ECD sector. I wonder if those are all things that played into how you selected.
So the cost is always one. So we had to look at a range of different providers who sent what you call those things in tenders or proposals in. But for us, it was a real one was familiarity with ELOM. So we knew we wanted to use ELOM, so that was a big part of it, and so experience or use of that. The other one was kind of functional, which was the ability to manage large scale data collection and evaluation. And even with that, there were challenges. So unfortunately, we had we spoke a bit about attrition. We had some attrition was just natural attrition of either practitioners leaving the program or children leaving, but one was also to do with a potentially like problematic management of one site, for like one set of assessors and sites. So I think even with all that assessments, there's going to be implementation challenges in the field. So that was really important to us. So someone who had that experience. And then we were really lucky that the organization that partnered had also partnered with an independent academic at UCT. And that was really also in the end very useful to us because we've been able to continue work with her in some of the deeper later analysis. So I think that combination of sort of ECD expertise, the evaluation, the programmatic ability to do an evaluation at scale, whether it's ECD or not, those two things were two important pieces to come together. So yeah, I think that if that answers your question. But yeah, and then obviously the big one was obviously then a bit of trading around what it was going to cost because it is very expensive work, as we know. And particularly if you're trying to reach all the children in different sites. And we were trying to have a range of sites. So as we just took 2 children per site. So yeah, it made it also expensive because it was traveling to all the different sites and so on.
Yeah, that's interesting because one of my other curiosities was around sampling approach, but now that answers my question. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Melissa, please go ahead.
Hi, sorry, I was looking for my unmute. I think it was noted that the practitioner is the key kind of determiner of child outcomes. I mean, we know that. We know the very important role that practitioners take. So I was wondering maybe if both presenters could speak quickly to how they mediated the results of using the ELOM back to the practitioners in ways that could help them actually improve their practice and their professional development, and if it was possible to do that. Thanks.
Yeah, and I will ask Rasisha to start with that just because of your comments at the end of your presentation about what ELOM doesn't tell you. So please go ahead, Rasisha.
Yes, thank you. So yes, it's very important for us to actually have created that feedback loop, considering a number of assessments that we did through the years. And we were really focused on how, ELOM would enhance and amplify what we are doing on the ground and impact on practitioners as the drivers of the program. So we actually looked at the granular detail that the results were telling us in terms of whether our numeracy gains were high, whether our literacy gains were actually plateauing, whether we needed to refine and amplify fine motor strengthening within the program. And so through our training modules and through our CPD workshops, we quite deliberately integrated content that was very specific to the data. But I also want to highlight pedagogical practice. And I mentioned somewhere in my presentation that, dialogic interaction, emotional and relational pedagogy, these are the huge influences of what happens in the classroom. And having gone through the validation of the Engage tool, which is really a measure of quality play-based learning in the classroom, it really amplified our understanding that whilst content's great, I mean, we all have fantastic curricula, but it is really the pedagogical practices and the adult-child interactions that was driving, outcomes. We even linked the engaged constructs and items to ELOM, and that clearly demonstrated for us that where we saw improved pedagogical practice, we saw high scores in ELOM. And so we almost drove those practice within the classroom environment in order to improve programming. So we were very deliberate and also very analytical about how we structured that continuous improvement in terms of classroom practice.
Yeah, that sounds really great. Thank you so much for elaborating on that workforce professionalization piece, Rosisha. Okay, I hope that answers your question, Melissa. Natalie, your turn.
Yes, thanks, Ibongile. Thanks, Justine and Rosisha. So very interesting and very enlightening. And I think Rosisha answered part of my question around the why. So there is acknowledgement that ELOM is an instrument, but it doesn't answer the contextual matters necessarily, okay? And Rosisha, you started speaking to that now already. So from my side, I want to get an understanding of if between you and Justine, you can give us a sense of what's the ideal package of support, or what are the level of inputs to get a contextual understanding of why your children are performing at that level or non-performing. What would that look like? Because as much as there's a strong focus on your practitioner, we also know from Thrive by Five that your household environment plays a big role, your parental caregiver support, all of those are all factors. So if you look at your level of control that is at the ELP level, what would be the ideal resourcing that you would put in to allow for answering and addressing the whys? And what would be the cost of that if we still know that this is donor driven and donor funded to a large extent? Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Natalie. And I'm going to give that question first to you, Justine, because you spoke about isolating program effects by controlling for these various factors. So if you can go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a tricky question. And I think probably the first one, Natalie, is the cost it takes to hire an external company that can do the statistical kind of analysis that you need for that, because that is not my expertise. So if I try to do it, I'm going to make a hodgepodge of the clever statistical people. But really, you need to have thought through what's your sample size in order to make any statement, and then to think about the kinds of factors that in your theory of change you think make a difference so that you can start looking for them. So the things we looked at were age of practitioner, how long they'd been in our program, so how much support they had, their qualifications, the social and the quintile, so the economic environment that the children were in. The ELOM parent interview looked at some of the home learning practices. And then we also looked at, oh yes, a really important one in terms of our intervention, how much coaching or coaching visits they had. And I think what was super interesting about that, and just going to Rashisha's point, I mean, I think I'm going to, just because I just have it here, I'm going to do it quickly. Just to say, just like Rashisha said, there were practices that the practitioner did that really made a difference. And what's important for us is these practices are not necessarily expensive. We didn't have a correlation with qualifications, which came out in Thrive by Five too. We saw more the use of a daily routine was really important. Their ability to play and learn at the level that's appropriate to the child. The building of the children's language was a really important one, and involving them in the program and in solving conflicts, and then acknowledging and encouraging children's efforts. But importantly, the other one that came out was the coaching practice. So more regular and frequent practical coaching. That was a really important one, where the practitioner felt they were given practical examples of what to do. So more experiential coaching is something that was felt to be really useful. So I think what's important there is figuring out, anytime you do it, I think collecting more data is better than less, but finding what would actually be statistically important is something you're going to probably have to rely on someone with that kind of training to help you pull apart.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Justine. Again, just a punt and encouraging everyone to ask any questions that you might have. I did have another one for you, Rosisha, in the meantime, and it's just in retrospect and in reflecting from this evaluation, I'm curious about whether there's anything that you would have done differently. Justine spoke about the importance of really thinking about designing for the future, asking the right questions, gathering the right data. So really thinking carefully and designing the study. But is there anything in your whole evaluation that you would have done differently and would integrate back into the next evaluation?
Yes, so I think Justine covered it quite adequately. But what I want to recognize is that when we actually using ELOM for validating new tools, I think that has been quite an exciting journey for us. And what it's actually broadened my scope around is pairing ELOM with the Engage tool and the Quest assessment. And I think kind of linking those data sets to give us a real deepened insight into what are some of the issues on the ground? What are some of the gaps, and how do we best close it so that we're not looking at data sets in isolation, but looking at ways in which to integrate an evidence-based ecosystem that really starts to deepen our understanding. I think with scale, we do a lot of breadth work. And I think the time has come for us to really start to deepen the way we start to support practitioners, how we resource and support centers, and even in terms of sustainability and more so program fidelity. What are some of those drivers? And I think those 3 data sets will give us quite a comprehensive picture. So next time around, I'm looking at deliberately linking those 3 standardized tools for our own assessment purposes.
Thank you so much, Rosisha. And I'm seeing your comment in the chat, Melissa, that you find it so interesting that qualifications are not seen as a key driver of good practice at ground level, as also noted in the Thrive by 5 index, which really spoke to and highlighting teaching practices as a critical factor and how some of these things can be overlooked in some of our qualifications. Google is commenting here, in an environment where there's a high staff turnover of practitioners, how do you maintain that high consistency in ELOM scores? And any one of you can take that. And Google, maybe you want to come off mute to add anything to this question?
Oh, hi. Hi, Sibongile. Yeah.
Okay.
So, Rosisha mentioned the importance of practitioners, and so I was just thinking that we know that there's high movement on the ground. People move, we train and they move. And so what is the strategy that they have in place, to ensure that as new people are coming in, and they, because she's talking about the consistency that is important to sustain the high scores. So what strategies do they have in place? How do you work around the movement of people, really?
I can try, and I think it's a really tricky thing. I mean, Google, we even saw it in the attrition of our sites because we weren't assessing sites, we were assessing smart starters at sites. So we were tracking people in that sense. And so when a practitioner left, we didn't, that was an attrition because in our model, we work with the practitioner as the key variable there. But just to say, I think that's why it's so important to identify the practices that are going to give you that, but also whatever programmatic pieces that you do to ensure that. So Rajisha explained a lot of what Unlimited Child does in supporting that. SmartStart also has similar program elements, but for example, we license all the practitioners using a tool that assesses the quality of what they do in their program. And so we're trying to use that, encourage those kinds of practices. So when there is a turnover for us, we have to start again with that practitioner, to start again with training, start again with licensing, and start again with that ongoing coaching. So the little mini workshops and the coaching. And that once you've understood those pieces, then it's how do you build that again with the new practitioner? Because as you're saying, it's like that is a natural, or not natural, but is a dominant feature of the South African ECD environment is that people do move quite substantially. And how do you know that that practitioner is operating at a standard that will give you good outcomes with children becomes really important.
Thanks for that, Justine. And I know it has been a big concern of yours, Gugu, in your work. And I've often said as long as they get caught on the other, by another organization in the ecosystem and are not lost to the sector altogether. But really, this emphasizes what you're saying, Justine, investing in people over and over and over. Rosisha, just a question for you is around, I mean, you mentioned a few pieces here about what you've done before, participation in the Alpo. How often do you recommend doing these sorts of summative evaluations, especially given the cost and the effort that goes into it?
Yeah, I just want to say that, ELOM assessments tend to be donor driven, and I'm glad there's donor presence here at this webinar because I think that they've almost built it into their evaluations, and we sometimes end up doing 3 or 4 ELOMs in the same year, which is completely unnecessary. And so what we've had is really engaged with our investment partners around the value of ELOM and the insights it provides, and that the time taken for program refinement is critical. So in my opinion, I mean, a pre and post test is hugely expensive. We did one in 2022 and 2024. And for us, we probably do the next one in 2026 or 2027. And every 2 to 3 years, a pre and post at that scale is recommended with a dipstick potentially in between, particularly if you are making programmatic adjustments and refinement. It would be nice just to get a quick insight into midterm, what is your program looking like? But it is expensive, a hugely expensive undertaking. And I think it's the narrative with our investment partners around you don't need to do one every year. And it really tells you and provides key insights in the long term, particularly a pre and post.
Yeah, thank you for that, Rosisha. And I'm just watching the time. Justine, you will have the final word before we close out. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to underline what Rosisha is saying because I think it's so important. Like, if you've invested once to do a really robust study with an external provider that proves your model is making gains, then as long as you stick to the fidelity of your model and making sure that you continue to do that, the need for a whole new evaluation regularly is just it's not needed. You've proven that your model works if you have a set of fidelity. So then what your question is what has changed? So over time, we have budgeted to try to do one every 3 to 4 years, because we're hoping to scale radically over all those times. So what we know is, even though we're keeping to our fidelity, is what's the pressure that's caused by going to scale. That might mean that it's harder to keep your fidelity in place. But if there's not much changing in your program, the logic should be you have proven with a good program that this works, therefore it should continue to work. So I think that that's one of the things we have to, as a sector, get better at explaining, because I think there is some trickiness in understanding it. because people would like you to do a dipstick. And that dipstick, as I mentioned earlier, so say, for example, a funder is interested in the particular rural area you're working and would like you to do a dipstick. That sample might not look good for you because that area has a huge stunting rate or a huge migratory population, which means that there's very little presence of parents because they're not around to support home learning or whatever the implications of the context is. So I think it's really important that anyway, just want to underline that.
Thanks, appreciate that, Justine. I just want to honor everyone's time and really just to say thank you all so much for joining this final webinar of the year. Given that it's such a busy time of the year, it's really lovely and encouraging to see and experience everyone's commitment to the work that we also love. And I want to especially thank you, Justine and Rosisha, for sharing so openly with us and the time that you've invested in preparing all of these presentations. And also, we've got some exciting new topics for 2026, and we'll kick off the series with a practical conversation about fieldwork. We know that early in the year, especially for those doing pre and post baseline studies in the beginning, this is a busy time, especially in February. So we want to kick off with something on fieldwork, which is perfectly timed for that. Otherwise, please keep an eye out for details about that next session, which is likely to take place in about the third week of January to prepare everyone for fieldwork in February. Okay, thank you all so much. Please stay connected a little bit for the feedback form, which will hopefully pop up as we end this webinar call. Thanks, everyone. See you in 2026.
Thank you.
Thank you.